There are certain moments in life that seem small on the surface, simple, everyday habits we barely give second thought to, but quietly carry enormous weight in determining our future. One of those overlooked details is a particular kind of phone call that, according to recent research, can actually predict early death in seniors. It sounds unbelievable, even sensational, but the evidence has been steadily growing in the scientific and geriatric care communities. It's not the content of the phone call, or who initiates it, or even how long it lasts, but rather the absence or presence of meaningful connection that it represents. See, what researchers have found is that seniors who lack consistent, emotionally fulfilling communication, especially with a voice on the other end of the line, are significantly more likely to experience rapid physical decline, cognitive deterioration, and even early mortality. This isn't just speculation. A groundbreaking study out of the University of California and confirmed by data from the AARP, and who reveals that loneliness, especially emotional isolation masked by superficial contact, is as deadly as smoking 15 cigarettes a day and more predictive of early death than obesity or high blood pressure. And phone calls, particularly the ones that serve as the only source of human connection for some seniors, are a critical point of measurement. But here's the kicker: not all phone calls are equal. A quick check-in to relay logistics or confirm a doctor's appointment isn't the kind of communication that protects health. It's the emotionally rich, heartfelt conversations, ones where seniors feel truly heard, valued, and emotionally engaged, that seem to offer a protective effect against the ravages of aging. In fact, researchers found that when seniors received at least one deep, emotionally resonant phone call per day, their rates of depression, hospital admissions, and inflammatory markers dropped significantly. Conversely, seniors who made or received no phone calls for days or weeks at a time, even if they were surrounded by people in a facility or neighborhood, had higher cortisol levels, weaker immune responses, and diminished sleep quality. These findings are a wake-up call, not just for seniors, but for families who assume that a quick weekly chat or a text message is enough to sustain their loved ones. The truth is, the human voice carries emotional tones, comfort, and a sense of presence that no text, email, or even social media interaction can replicate. Seniors, particularly those over the age of 65, often find themselves in a new phase of life where longtime friends have passed, spouses are no longer present, and family dynamics have shifted. Children are busy, grandchildren are distracted by devices, and what once was a life filled with daily banter and shared meals can slowly turn into long, silent hours. That's where the significance of the phone call becomes life-altering. It becomes a thread that ties seniors back into the fabric of human emotion, memory, and vitality. What's even more striking is that it's not just about hearing a familiar voice. It's about the exchange of emotional information, the act of recalling shared memories, laughing together, expressing concern, or simply asking, "How are you really doing?" These moments activate the brain in powerful ways. Neuroimaging studies have shown that emotional conversations trigger the release of oxytocin and serotonin, the very chemicals that promote bonding, reduce stress, and improve cardiovascular function. In contrast, seniors who spend days without such stimulation begin to lose not only their psychological edge, but also their physiological resilience. Muscles become weaker, not just from lack of movement, but from the brain's withdrawal from its social environment. Sleep becomes shallow and fragmented. Appetite declines. Medication adherence drops. And cognitive function begins to slip, not due to any diagnosable illness, but due to what neurologists call social starvation, a form of sensory deprivation that mimics the effects of mild brain trauma over time. What's tragic is that this often unfolds unnoticed. A senior may appear fine to the outside world: clean clothes, decent meals, maybe even a morning walk. But inside, their emotional circuitry is withering from disuse. The brain, like a muscle, needs stimulation. And one of the most profound forms of stimulation is human connection, especially spoken interaction with someone who genuinely cares. Now imagine the contrast between a senior who starts their day with a 5-minute heartfelt phone call from a grandchild sharing a silly school story, versus another who goes the entire week with no voice, no engagement, only silent TV shows and background noise from passing cars. That 5 minutes of warmth isn't just pleasant, it's medicine. It strengthens immune function, regulates sleep cycles, improves digestion, and sharpens mental clarity. It literally adds days, months, and sometimes years to a person's life. And yet, we treat it like a casual option, something nice to do when we have time, rather than the critical health intervention that it truly is. For seniors themselves, recognizing the power of that phone call can be transformative. It means that reaching out isn't a burden to others. It's a vital act of self-preservation. It means giving yourself permission to call someone just to talk about the weather or your garden or what's on the news, and not feeling guilty for bothering anyone. Because every time you engage in an emotionally nourishing conversation, you're activating parts of your biology that are directly tied to your longevity. You're improving circulation to your heart and brain. You're helping regulate your blood sugar. You're protecting your memory. And this is just the beginning of what researchers are calling the emotional infrastructure of aging. When we start to understand emotional infrastructure as a health necessity rather than a luxury, everything about senior care shifts. Instead of focusing solely on pills, physical therapy, or dietary changes, we begin to examine the invisible scaffolding that holds a person's emotional life together. And at the heart of that scaffolding is communication, especially the kind that affirms identity, values, and belonging. It's not simply about hearing a voice. It's about being seen and acknowledged by someone who remembers who you are beyond your medications and appointments. Seniors who engage in regular, meaningful phone conversations are not just talking. They're anchoring themselves to a purpose, to continuity, to a sense of value in the world. Studies from Harvard and Stanford have shown that emotional support via regular voice contact can mitigate the effects of chronic illness, reduce emergency hospitalizations, and even slow the rate of cognitive decline. In fact, elderly individuals who had regular verbal communication with a supportive person performed better on memory tests, retained verbal fluency longer, and had stronger immune markers than those who had more social media interaction or even face-to-face visits that lacked emotional depth. That's because it's not about proximity, it's about connection. And the phone, often dismissed as outdated in a world of messaging apps, still holds unique power, especially for those over 60. For many seniors, the act of holding a phone, listening intently, and responding in real time is cognitively stimulating. It activates language centers in the brain, improves auditory processing, and creates emotional resonance in a way that texting never will. But the key is consistency. Just as one healthy meal doesn't reverse years of poor nutrition, a single conversation doesn't offer lasting protection. It must be habitual. In Okinawa, Japan, one of the world's blue zones where people often live past 100, elderly residents engage in regular community calls and check-ins that are ritualized, almost sacred. These conversations are not rushed or functional. They are purposeful, warm, and emotionally validating. And in the US, programs like the Friendly Voice Initiative have shown that even volunteers calling isolated seniors weekly have drastically reduced their anxiety levels, improved sleep, and restored a sense of joy that even medication had failed to deliver. These findings should inspire a cultural shift, one where families place as much importance on emotional connection as they do on providing financial support or helping with groceries. Imagine a calendar not just filled with medical appointments, but also with scheduled calls from children, neighbors, or longtime friends, prioritized as seriously as physical exercise or medication. Emotional nourishment should be structured, expected, and celebrated, not left to chance. because the effects are not only psychological, they're profoundly physical. Cortisol, the stress hormone that accelerates aging and weakens the heart, is dramatically lowered after meaningful conversation. Blood pressure stabilizes. Digestion improves. Even wound healing accelerates. In contrast, seniors who report having no one to talk to regularly experience higher rates of insomnia, diabetes, and inflammatory conditions like arthritis and heart disease. Their health declines silently, often before anyone notices. And too often, by the time these issues are caught, they've already taken years off their life expectancy. But here's the part many families fail to understand. Seniors will rarely complain. They won't beg for your time. They may even say they are fine when they're aching inside for a real conversation. They've been conditioned not to impose, not to seem needy, not to interrupt your busy life. But silence should never be interpreted as contentment. It's often a signal of resignation, of adaptation to emotional neglect that slowly corrodes their spirit. One grandmother in a major university study said she had not heard the voice of a family member in over 6 months, despite living just 20 minutes away from her adult children. She had become invisible, though not by malice, just by the inertia of modern life. But her health metrics told a different story. Rising blood pressure, erratic heart rate, increased forgetfulness, and early signs of depression, all of which improved significantly after a volunteer began calling her 3 times a week for just 10 minutes. That's the miracle of human connection. It doesn't take hours, it takes sincerity. And while technology has made communication easier, it has also made it more superficial. Scrolling past a senior's Facebook post is not the same as asking them how they feel. Clicking a heart on a photo does not replace the warmth of hearing "I miss you" through the speaker of a phone. For many seniors, especially those who live alone or in retirement communities, the voice of a loved one is the most important sound in their world. It affirms their place in the family, reminds them they're still part of something larger, and revives memories that keep their identity intact. Even when dementia is present, studies show that the sound of a familiar voice can reduce agitation, improve mood, and slow memory loss. It is quite literally therapeutic, and yet we continue to undervalue it. We think we're doing enough by visiting once a month or setting up a family group chat. But a chat thread can't convey the tone of voice that says, "I care." It can't carry the pause, the chuckle, the sigh that reminds someone they are heard with love and attention. For seniors, that lack of tone is a silence that echoes in the most dangerous way. Because what follows silence isn't just boredom, it's loneliness. And loneliness is not just an emotional state. It is a clinical risk factor. It causes inflammation, reduces blood flow to the brain, weakens bones, and accelerates cellular aging. In fact, telomeres, the protective caps on your DNA, shorten faster in chronically lonely individuals, which means their body is literally aging at an accelerated pace. But the most dangerous part? It's invisible. No blood test can diagnose loneliness. It doesn't show up on X-rays. You have to listen for it, in the way someone avoids talking about their day, in the long pauses when asked how they're feeling, in the subtle resignation in their voice. And that's why consistent, loving phone calls are not just a kindness. They're a diagnostic tool, a therapeutic touchpoint, and a lifeline rolled into one. When someone makes or receives a heartfelt call, they're not just passing time. They're fortifying their entire biological system against the threats of isolation, decay, and early mortality. And yet, despite all this compelling evidence, the simple act of calling a senior regularly remains one of the most overlooked and undervalued health interventions in our modern world. This is in part due to how we've redefined connection in the digital age, where a like, a comment, or an emoji is often mistaken for meaningful interaction. And in doing so, we miss the irreplaceable depth that comes from hearing a real human voice, filled with nuance, memory, and genuine concern. The voice that remembers your favorite meal, your childhood stories, the name of a long-lost dog, or the way your laugh used to sound before grief slowed it down. That voice has healing power beyond measure, especially for seniors whose lives have become quiet not by choice but by slow, creeping neglect. Think about the thousands of seniors who once lived full, bustling lives filled with coworkers, children, hobbies, social clubs, and laughter, and now spend entire days in near silence, except for the hum of the refrigerator or the distant sound of a television playing to no one in particular. Without frequent phone calls, many of them go days without speaking a word, and science has shown that this absence of verbal interaction can lead to brain atrophy in the regions responsible for language, memory, and emotional regulation. It's a slow erosion of the self, and unlike physical ailments, this emotional and cognitive decline often isn't recognized until it's deeply rooted. But what's most heartbreaking is how easily preventable so much of this is. The phone is already in our hands. The contacts are already saved. The opportunity is there, but it's pushed aside in favor of errands, distractions, or the mistaken belief that a short message or forwarded meme is enough. But it's not. For seniors, especially those over the age of 70, the phone call is not old-fashioned. It's essential. It's not a backup option to a visit. It is the lifeline when a visit isn't possible. And it's not just about checking in. It's about restoring dignity, reminding them they are remembered, they are loved, and their voice still matters. There's a profound difference between knowing someone is alive and making them feel alive. And a phone call does the latter. It invites them to participate in the world, to tell stories, to ask questions, to reflect on memories, and to share wisdom. It makes them feel needed, not just cared for. It reawakens a sense of purpose, which is one of the most powerful predictors of longevity, according to the most rigorous gerontology studies. Seniors with a sense of daily purpose, no matter how small, live longer, experience fewer hospital visits, and maintain sharper mental clarity. A regular phone call can become that purpose. It gives them something to look forward to, something to prepare for, a reason to stay engaged with life. They might jot down stories they want to tell, updates they want to share, or even questions they want to ask. This simple anticipation creates mental activity that mimics the benefits of puzzles or brain games. And unlike a crossword puzzle, a phone call offers emotional warmth that triggers oxytocin release, reduces cortisol, and boosts mood. When this happens regularly, it creates what psychologists call an emotional buffer that protects against stress and inflammation. This isn't abstract theory. This is proven science. In fact, one clinical trial followed 2 groups of seniors over a period of a year. One group received 2 phone calls a week from trained volunteers, and the other continued their usual routine with occasional family visits. The results were staggering. The phone call group reported 40% fewer depressive symptoms, had 20% better scores in short-term memory tests, and showed lower blood pressure readings despite no change in medication. More impressively, their rate of emergency room visits declined by 30%, just from phone calls. Imagine if any pill had those results. It would be on the front page of every health magazine. But because it's just talking, it gets dismissed as soft science, when in truth, it's one of the most potent interventions we have, and one that costs almost nothing. But not all phone calls are created equal. For the benefits to be fully realized, the conversation must be rooted in presence, not obligation. That means no multitasking, no scrolling while half listening, no putting it on speakerphone while doing chores. Seniors know when they're being truly heard. They can detect the warmth or absence of engagement in your tone. A 2-minute call full of genuine attention is more powerful than a 15-minute chat laced with distracted sighs. It's the quality, not just the frequency, that matters. And while daily calls might not be realistic for everyone, even a structured schedule, every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday, for example, creates rhythm and reliability, which are profoundly soothing for older adults who often feel their lives have become unpredictable or unstable. Furthermore, These calls should not be limited to superficial updates. Go deeper. Ask about their past. Invite their opinion. Remind them of old memories. Reflect on your shared history. Laugh with them. Share your struggles. When you include a senior in your emotional world, not just your logistical needs, you elevate them from being passive recipients of care to active participants in your life. That transformation can be the difference between mental stagnation and emotional vitality. Some of the most vibrant seniors alive today are not necessarily the ones with perfect physical health, but the ones whose days are infused with conversation, reflection, and connection. They feel emotionally hydrated, not parched, and that sustains them through pain, loneliness, and the aches of aging in ways that medicine alone cannot. There are entire families who realize, far too late, that the call they didn't make was the one their loved one needed most. Not because it would have changed the outcome of their illness, but because it would have changed how they felt about their final weeks or months. No one should ever feel abandoned while still surrounded by family. But without regular, meaningful communication, that's exactly how many seniors feel: invisible, undervalued, forgotten. This is where the real truth hits. When we look past the science, past the statistics, and confront the human cost of silence, the emotional toll of each call not made, of each moment of connection that was skipped because we assumed there would always be more time. And for countless seniors, more time doesn't always come, which makes every call not only precious, but potentially life-changing, because connection is not a luxury in old age. It is a lifeline, one that stabilizes their mental health, supports their cardiovascular system, strengthens their immunity, improves sleep quality, and keeps the flame of identity alive. Because when you're not regularly spoken to, not regularly reminded of who you are to someone else, the contours of self begin to fade like an old photograph left in the sun, and eventually the mind, starved of recognition and emotional input, begins to shrink in both a literal and metaphorical sense. And yet when you do call, when you show up consistently, when you listen with your full attention, when your voice enters their quiet room like sunlight through a dusty window, it doesn't just make their day, it nourishes them in ways we're only beginning to understand, as studies continue to reveal that regular verbal interaction activates regions of the brain tied to memory consolidation, emotional regulation, and even physical balance. With seniors who engage in daily verbal communication showing reduced risk of falls, improved medication compliance, and stronger cardiovascular resilience. And all of this from something so simple it costs nothing but time. And still, the most incredible impact of the phone call is what it gives to you, the caller, because these conversations don't just preserve your loved one. They preserve your own humanity, your connection to where you came from, to your lineage, to your family story. And in an age where everything moves faster and shallow interactions are the norm, that call becomes your anchor, a small, sacred ritual that brings you into the present, that grounds you in compassion and care. And time and again, those who make these calls consistently report a boost in their own mood, a reduced sense of anxiety, and even an increased sense of gratitude. Because being in contact with someone who has lived through decades of change, hardship, and triumph gives perspective that no self-help book can offer. And over time, that relationship becomes a reciprocal exchange of wisdom and love, not a one-sided duty. And it strengthens bonds that might otherwise have frayed from the distance of years or misunderstanding. And for those who feel awkward making the call because it's been too long, or because they fear not knowing what to say, the truth is that just showing up matters more than perfect words, that silence shared is better than silence endured alone, and that the sound of a familiar voice, even if it carries hesitation, is still a balm for the isolated soul. And as each call builds, upon the next a rhythm forms, and with it a kind of safety, a foundation from which seniors can face the uncertainty of aging not with fear, but with support, because they know someone is thinking of them, someone is checking in, someone is listening, and this simple certainty can make them more likely to seek medical help early, more likely to manage chronic conditions, more likely to take walks, stay socially active, and eat healthier, all of which compound the benefits of the calls themselves, creating a positive feedback loop that literally adds quality years to their life. And just as importantly, life to their years, because when someone feels loved, truly loved, they carry themselves differently. They walk with more steadiness. They speak with more vitality. They remember more details. They laugh more easily. And the world doesn't seem so lonely or intimidating. And in this way, your phone call doesn't just predict early death. It helps prevent it by extending the reach of connection across distance, across time zones, across life stages. And this is why we at Healthful Living 60 Plus emphasize again and again that what you do today could change the course of someone's tomorrow. That one call made consistently, sincerely, and with love is worth more than any supplement or fitness tracker because it strikes at the root cause of premature decline in the elderly, disconnection. And the healing of that disconnection begins with you choosing to pick up the phone, not because it's convenient, but because it matters more than we often realize. And when you make that call, you're not only brightening a day, you're reshaping a mind, supporting a heart, strengthening a bond, and perhaps even saving a life in the most unassuming, beautiful way possible, which is the kind of legacy we should all hope to leave, one voice at a time.